there's a kind of a layer of compassion that has to be on top of all of those things. I'm wondering actually what your reaction is to thinking about recovery in that way.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's pretty good just in terms of like especially the stuff of like when it comes back, um, how you might feel and think. So having had that, having had kind of peaks and valleys, um, in the last few years, it's been helpful to get some practice on it coming back, and sort of starting to know what that looks like and being able to predict what will happen there. Just how you feel sometimes hopeless, and think like, oh, this is forever. Um, and it's always going to come, it's always going to come back. But there are a number of different attitudes that you could have about that. And the hopelessness one, wants to show up in the moment. But a good way to counter that I've found is to just remember, that it coming back, the whole thing comes back, including the recovery. In other words, when it comes back, it feels like you're back in this awful place and you'll be there forever. But actually, what's come back is this temporary thing that won't last very long at all necessarily. In my case, I often bounce back pretty quickly, and especially thinking about that. That's been really helpful with panic attacks. It's like I'm not going to feel this way forever.
Yeah, and your new situation is not just, or like what's come back is not just the triggers and the sensations, but also the recovery. You still have memories from your recovery, and you still have your skills that you've learned in the last time you've recovered.
Yeah, like it's not going to feel like this forever.
That's great. Do you want to be more specific about when it's felt like you've kind of recovered from anxiety, and then I don't think relapse is the right word, but like when your anxiety has come back, under what conditions are you triggered again?
Um, yeah, I mean, it could be anything, not getting enough sleep or a sudden spike in stress at work, um, or just, kind of out of the blue, not having it, sometimes the spikes in stress at work are actually fine because there's problem solving to do, right?
Mhm.
Sometimes it comes back when there are no problems to, when the number of problems to solve has gotten suddenly low. You would think that would be a good time to relax, but that's often a good time for anxiety to show up as well. Um, and so, yeah, so that often happens. And just keeping in mind that, none of this so far for me has been permanent. I've never had a particular feeling last more than a week.
That's really compassionate that even a week doesn't feel like too long for you. Can you say
Right.
more about that?
Yeah, I mean, and it can, a week is plenty of time to be really, really miserable. But just, the idea that, well, because I think for me, a lot of the fear early on was like, oh, this is forever. This is the new normal, or I'm going to feel like this forever. Uh, that has been a good thing to get perspective about. That I think it's probably pretty unusual for someone to feel something forever. Whether that's happiness, at least for happiness, humans have evolved, hedonic adaptation where you can't, whatever makes you happy will not make you happy forever. I would assume that that a process like that might be in place for any number of feelings. Like, for instance, after a breakup, it's reminiscent because that always feels to people like, you'll never, things will never go back to normal. When you're a teenager and your first relationship ends, but eventually it does. And I'm sure there are some things that are much more persistent, certain kinds of grief and things like that. But I've found, at least for me, none of my feelings have a ton of staying power, and that's a good thing.